Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that every love story you've ever believed in, every romantic ideal you've cherished, every relationship you've pursued, has been nothing more than an elaborate illusion. Picture yourself standing in front of a mirror, not seeing your reflection, but witnessing the ghost of every person you thought you loved staring back at you. Their faces morph and shift, revealing not the individuals you remember, but fragments of yourself you never knew existed. This isn't the opening to a psychological thriller. This is the brutal reality that Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, discovered when he dove into the deepest caverns of the human psyche. What he found wasn't the neat, tidy romance novels promise us, but something far more unsettling and infinitely more profound. You see, Jung realized that what we call love in our modern world is often nothing more than a sophisticated form of psychological projection. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the missing pieces of ourselves that we glimpse in others. We chase shadows, convinced their substance. We build entire relationships on foundations of sand, wondering why they crumble when the first real storm hits. But here's where Jung's revelation becomes truly disturbing. Most people will live their entire lives without ever experiencing what he called true love. They'll move from relationship to relationship, from passion to passion, always searching for something that feels just out of reach. They'll mistake obsession for devotion, dependency for connection, and familiarity for intimacy. They'll settle for pale imitations of love, never realizing that the real thing, the kind that transforms you at your core, operates by completely different rules. Consider this paradox. The people who claim to love you most might be the ones who know you least. Your partner of 10 years might be more in love with the version of you they've constructed in their mind than the person you actually are. Your closest friends might be drawn to you not because of who you are, but because of how you make them feel about themselves. Even your family's love might be conditional on you playing the role they've assigned you in their psychological drama. Jung discovered that behind every "I love you" lies a hidden question. What are you giving me that I cannot give myself? Behind every romantic gesture lurks an unconscious transaction. I will love you as long as you continue to be the person I need you to be. Behind every passionate kiss lies a desperate attempt to merge with another human being in order to escape the terrifying isolation of being yourself. This is why Jung believed that most relationships are not between two people, but between four people, the two conscious individuals and the two unconscious shadow cells they project onto each other. We fall in love with our own psychological material, reflected in another person's eyes. We mistake this reflection for the person themselves, and then wonder why the magic fades when reality inevitably intrudes. But Jung didn't stop at this devastating diagnosis. He discovered something that changes everything. There are hidden signs, subtle, almost imperceptible markers, that reveal when you've stumbled into the realm of true love. These signs don't appear in greeting cards or romantic comedies. They don't conform to society's expectations or your own fantasies about what love should look like. In fact, they're so counterintuitive that most people miss them entirely, even when they're experiencing them. These signs emerge from the depths of the psyche, from that mysterious place where individual consciousness meets the collective unconscious. They're rooted in processes that have been shaping human relationships for millennia, yet they remain largely invisible to our surface-level awareness. They reveal themselves not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through subtle shifts in how you perceive yourself, your partner, and the world around you. The question that haunts every thinking person eventually becomes, how do you know when you've found it? How do you distinguish between the intoxicating illusion of projection and the transformative reality of genuine connection? How do you recognize true love when it doesn't match any of the stories you've been told about what love should be? Jung spent decades exploring these questions, and what he discovered will shatter every assumption you have about love, relationships, and human connection. But more importantly, it will give you the tools to recognize the real thing when it appears in your life. and to understand why it might look nothing like what you expected. The answers lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond the surface of their own psychological projections and into the mysterious depths of authentic human connection. The crisis of modern love didn't emerge from nowhere. It's the inevitable result of a psychological mechanism that Jung termed the anima and animus, the unconscious feminine aspect within men and the unconscious masculine aspect within women. But this concept runs far deeper than simple gender psychology. It reveals how we've become alienated from our own completeness, desperately seeking in others what we've disowned within ourselves. Jung understood that every human being is born psychologically wounded, not wounded by trauma or neglect, though these certainly compound the problem, but wounded by the very process of becoming an individual. To develop a coherent sense of self, we must reject and repress vast portions of our psychological potential. The sensitive boy learns to hide his vulnerability to avoid being seen as weak. The intelligent girl learns to dim her light to avoid threatening others. The naturally rebellious child learns to conform to gain acceptance and love. These rejected aspects of ourselves don't simply disappear. They form what Jung called the shadow, the repository of everything we've decided we're not allowed to be. But here's the cruel paradox. The very qualities we've banished to our shadow are often precisely what we find most magnetically attractive in others. We fall in love with people who embody our disowned potential, mistaking this attraction for compatibility or destiny. Friedrich Nietzsche, whose work deeply influenced Jung, warned us about this trap when he wrote about the eternal recurrence, the idea that we're doomed to repeat the same patterns until we become conscious of them. In relationships, this manifests as the compulsive attraction to the same type of person, regardless of how many times that type has disappointed us. We're not choosing partners. We're choosing mirrors that reflect our own unconscious material back to us. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, understood this from a different angle. He observed that what we call love is often nothing more than the will to live expressing itself through us, a biological imperative disguised as romantic feeling. We're attracted to those who possess the genetic or psychological qualities that our unconscious believes will complete us or compensate for our perceived deficiencies. This isn't love. It's unconscious selection driven by our deepest insecurities. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre took this analysis even further, arguing that we use others as objects in our project of self-definition. We don't love people. We love the version of ourselves that we become when we're with them. This is why the end of a relationship can feel like a death, because in losing the other person, we lose access to aspects of ourselves that we could only express in their presence. Jung discovered that this psychological dynamic creates what he called participation mystique, a state where we lose the boundaries between self and other, believing we've found our other half or soulmate. But this mystical merger is actually a regression to an earlier developmental stage, a return to the oceanic unity we experienced in the womb. It feels transcendent, but it's actually a form of psychological inflation that prevents genuine intimacy. The tragedy is that our culture has elevated this regressive state to the pinnacle of romantic achievement. We celebrate couples who complete each other, who can't live without each other, who've found their other half. We've romanticized psychological dependency and called it love. We've glorified the very patterns that prevent us from developing into whole, autonomous individuals capable of genuine connection. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, understood that meaning, not happiness or completion, is the driving force of human existence. When we seek meaning through another person, we inevitably reduce them to a means to our psychological ends. True love, Frankl suggested, involves loving someone for their own sake, not for what they provide us or how they make us feel about ourselves. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He realized that the very psychological mechanisms that create false love also contain the seeds of true love. The anima and animus, when consciously integrated rather than projected, become the bridge to authentic connection. The shadow, when acknowledged and owned, stops being the unconscious driver of our attractions and becomes the foundation for genuine self-knowledge. The problem is that this integration requires something our culture actively discourages: the willingness to be alone with ourselves long enough to discover who we actually are beneath our projections, defenses, and social conditioning. It requires what Jung called individuation, the painful process of becoming a whole person rather than a collection of roles and reactions. Most people would rather maintain the illusion of love through projection than endure the loneliness and terror of discovering their authentic self. They'd rather chase the familiar drama of unconscious attraction than risk the vulnerability of conscious connection. They'd rather live in the comfortable prison of their psychological patterns than face the freedom and responsibility of genuine love. This is why Jung believed that true love is so rare. It requires two people who have done the inner work of integration, who can stand alone before they choose to stand together. It requires individuals who love themselves enough to stop using others as mirrors and start seeing them as separate, autonomous beings worthy of love for their own sake. The hidden problem, then, isn't that we can't find love. It's that we've been looking for it in all the wrong places, using all the wrong methods for all the wrong reasons. We've been seeking completion instead of connection, possession instead of appreciation, projection instead of presence. But Jung's discovery of the hidden signs offers a way out of this prison. They reveal the subtle markers that appear when projection gives way to perception, when unconscious attraction transforms into conscious love, when two people stop trying to complete each other and start celebrating each other's completeness. These signs emerge from the depths of the psyche like messenger birds from another realm, carrying news of a love that's possible but not guaranteed, available but not automatic, real but not romantic in the way we've been taught to expect. The psychological patterns Jung identified don't remain confined to the private realm of relationships. They seep into every aspect of human existence, creating a cascade of consequences that shape not just how we love, but how we work, create, lead, and understand our place in the world. When an entire civilization is built on the foundation of unconscious projection, the results are as predictable as they are devastating. Consider the modern epidemic of loneliness. Despite being more connected than ever through technology, people report feeling more isolated than at any point in recorded history. Jung would have seen this as inevitable. When you mistake projection for connection, you could be surrounded by people and still feel fundamentally alone. You're not connecting with others. You're connecting with reflections of yourself. The moment those reflections fail to provide the validation or completion you seek, the illusion shatters, leaving you more isolated than before. This dynamic creates what psychologists now call anxious attachment, a pattern where people simultaneously crave intimacy and fear abandonment. They develop relationships that feel intense, but unstable, passionate, but ultimately empty. They become addicted to the neurochemical high of projection-based attraction, mistaking the anxiety and uncertainty for passion. They interpret the obsessive thoughts and emotional volatility as signs of true love, never realizing they're actually experiencing the psychological equivalent of withdrawal symptoms. The neurological implications are profound. When we're caught in projection patterns, our brains literally rewire themselves to become dependent on external validation. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for rational decision-making and self-awareness, becomes hijacked by the limbic system's desperate search for completion. We lose the ability to think clearly about relationships, becoming slaves to neurochemical reactions that feel meaningful but are actually just sophisticated survival mechanisms. This neurological hijacking explains why intelligent, accomplished people can become completely irrational in romantic relationships. A successful CEO who makes million-dollar decisions with clarity and precision becomes paralyzed by anxiety when their partner doesn't respond to a text within an hour. A brilliant artist who creates profound works of beauty becomes convinced they're worthless when their lover seems distant. The very people who should be most capable of conscious love become its most tragic victims. Jung understood that this personal dysfunction inevitably becomes collective dysfunction. When individuals are trapped in projection patterns, they create institutions, cultures, and societies that reflect these same patterns. We end up with a civilization that's simultaneously obsessed with love and incapable of achieving it. A culture that produces endless romantic entertainment while divorce rates soar and genuine intimacy becomes increasingly rare. The consequences extend far beyond romantic relationships. In the workplace, projection-based patterns create toxic dynamics where people are valued not for their authentic contributions, but for their ability to reflect back what others want to see. Leaders surround themselves with people who mirror their own beliefs, creating echo chambers that prevent genuine innovation and growth. Employees become addicted to external validation, losing touch with their intrinsic motivation and creative potential. In politics, these patterns become even more dangerous. Citizens project their own disowned power onto charismatic leaders, creating cult-like followings that have nothing to do with actual governance and everything to do with psychological dependency. Politicians exploit these projection patterns, promising to be the external solution to internal problems that can only be resolved through individual consciousness and responsibility. The digital age has amplified these consequences exponentially. Social media platforms are designed to trigger and exploit projection patterns, creating addictive feedback loops that keep people scrolling, liking, and sharing in a desperate attempt to feel seen and validated. People curate false versions of themselves, projecting idealized images while feeling increasingly disconnected from their authentic experience. They fall in love with carefully constructed online personas, mistaking digital projections for real people. Dating apps represent the ultimate commercialization of projection-based love. They reduce human beings to a collection of images and bullet points, encouraging people to make split-second decisions based on superficial triggers that activate their unconscious patterns. The entire system is designed to keep people swiping, never quite finding what they're looking for because they're looking for something that doesn't exist, the perfect external solution to their internal incompleteness. Perhaps most tragically, these patterns are passed down through generations like a psychological inheritance. Children who grow up in projection-based families learn that love is conditional, that they must perform certain roles to receive attention and affection. They internalize the message that their authentic self is not worthy of love, setting them up to repeat the same patterns in their own relationships. The cycle continues, each generation slightly more disconnected from the possibility of genuine love than the last. The cultural consequences are equally devastating. We've created an entertainment industry that glorifies the very patterns that prevent true love. Romantic comedies celebrate obsession and call it devotion. Love songs praise dependency and call it commitment. Reality TV shows exploit projection patterns for entertainment, turning the sacred realm of human connection into a commodity to be consumed and discarded. This cultural programming runs so deep that most people can't even imagine what healthy love might look like. They've been so conditioned to associate love with drama, intensity, and emotional volatility that genuine intimacy, which is actually quite peaceful and stable, feels boring or insufficient. They mistake the absence of neurochemical chaos for the absence of passion, never realizing that true passion emerges from presence, not projection. The medical consequences are equally alarming. Chronic stress from projection-based relationships creates inflammation, suppresses immune function, and accelerates aging. The constant state of anxiety and emotional volatility literally rewires the nervous system, creating patterns of reactivity that extend far beyond romantic relationships. People become chronically activated, unable to access the deep rest and restoration that come from feeling genuinely seen and accepted. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is the loss of what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's natural ability to synthesize opposites and create new possibilities. When we're trapped in projection patterns, we lose access to our creative potential, our capacity for genuine insight, and our ability to contribute something meaningful to the world. We become psychological consumers rather than creators, always seeking from the outside what we could generate from within. Yet, Jung discovered that embedded within these very consequences are the seeds of transformation. The suffering created by projection-based love eventually becomes so intense that it forces a confrontation with reality. The repeated failure of external solutions to internal problems creates a crisis that can catalyze awakening. The emptiness left by collapsed projections creates space for something authentic to emerge. This is why Jung believed that the path to true love necessarily leads through the dark night of the soul, a period of profound disillusionment where all external sources of validation and completion are stripped away. Only in this darkness can we begin to see the faint light of the hidden signs, the subtle markers that point toward a love that's been waiting patiently for us to stop looking everywhere else. The rebellion against projection-based love doesn't begin with finding the right person. It begins with becoming the right person. This is perhaps the most radical and counterintuitive insight Jung offered. True love is not something you find, but something you become capable of when you stop needing it to complete you. The first act of rebellion is what Jung called active imagination, the practice of engaging consciously with the unconscious material that normally gets projected onto others. Instead of falling in love with someone who embodies your anima or animus, you begin a dialogue with these archetypal figures within your own psyche. You learn to recognize when you're being pulled by projection and choose to turn inward instead of outward. This practice requires tremendous courage because it means facing the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. The sensitive man must reclaim his vulnerability without shame. The powerful woman must embrace her receptivity without feeling weak. The intellectual must acknowledge their emotional depths. The artist must accept their need for structure. Each person must retrieve the golden qualities they've been seeing in others and recognize them as disowned aspects of themselves. Consider the story of Emma Jung, Carl's wife, who spent decades as the shadow behind her famous husband's work. She eventually rebelled against this dynamic not by leaving Carl, but by developing her own relationship with her animus, the inner masculine that she had been projecting onto him. She became a respected analyst in her own right, and, paradoxically, this individuation strengthened rather than weakened their marriage. When she stopped needing Carl to be her animus, she could love him for who he actually was. The second act of rebellion involves what Jung termed holding the tension of opposites. Instead of seeking a partner who will resolve your internal conflicts, you learn to contain paradox within yourself. You become comfortable with being both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both certain and uncertain. This capacity to hold opposites without needing to resolve them is what allows for genuine intimacy, the ability to be close to someone without losing yourself or trying to change them. Historical examples of this rebellion are rare but profound. The 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart wrote about a love that required detachment, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of love without the need to possess or control. The Sufi poet Rumi described a love that could only exist between two people who had already fallen in love with the divine within themselves. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts, but practical insights born from direct experience of what Jung would later call individuation. The third act of rebellion is learning to love consciously rather than unconsciously. This means developing what Jung called feeling-toned complexes, the ability to feel your emotions fully while maintaining conscious awareness of their source and meaning. When you feel jealous, instead of blaming your partner, you explore what the jealousy reveals about your own insecurities. When you feel attracted to someone, Instead of immediately pursuing them, you investigate what aspect of yourself they represent. This conscious approach to love feels almost mechanical at first, like learning to drive a car while thinking about every movement. But gradually, it becomes second nature, a way of being that's simultaneously more spontaneous and more intentional than unconscious love. You learn to appreciate the person in front of you rather than the projection you've placed on them. The fourth act of rebellion involves what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create something new from the synthesis of opposites. In relationships, this means moving beyond the either/, or thinking that characterizes projection-based love. Instead of choosing between independence and connection, you create a third option that honors both. Instead of alternating between idealization and devaluation, you develop the capacity for what Jung called realistic love, seeing both the light and shadow in yourself and others without needing to fix or escape either. This rebellion requires practical tools that Jung developed through decades of clinical work. Dream analysis becomes a way of understanding your unconscious patterns without needing to act them out in relationships. Journaling helps you distinguish between your authentic feelings and your projections. Meditation develops the capacity to observe your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. Creative expression provides an outlet for the archetypal energies that might otherwise be projected onto romantic partners. Perhaps most importantly, this rebellion involves surrounding yourself with people who support your individuation rather than your projections. This often means letting go of relationships that are based on mutual projection, even when they feel comfortable or familiar. It means choosing friends who see and appreciate your authentic self rather than the roles you play. It means finding mentors who model conscious love rather than unconscious patterns. The rebellion also extends to how you interact with culture. You begin to see through the projection-based programming in movies, music, and social media. You stop consuming romantic entertainment that reinforces unconscious patterns. You become selective about the voices you allow into your psyche, choosing influences that support your growth rather than your addictions. This process is not linear or easy. Jung himself struggled with projection patterns throughout his life, including a complex relationship with his patient Sabina Spielrein that blurred the boundaries between analysis and romance. But his willingness to examine these patterns consciously rather than simply acting them out unconsciously eventually led to profound insights about the nature of love and the psyche. The rebellion ultimately leads to what Jung called the union of opposites, not with another person, but within yourself. You become psychologically androgynous, containing both masculine and feminine qualities in conscious relationship. You develop what the alchemists called the philosophical marriage, the sacred union of all aspects of yourself that makes external projection unnecessary. When you reach this stage, love becomes possible in an entirely new way. You're no longer seeking completion or validation from others. You're no longer trying to escape yourself through merger with another. Instead, you're offering your wholeness to someone else's wholeness, creating a connection that enhances rather than diminishes your individuality. This is when the hidden signs of true love begin to emerge, not as desperate attempts to fill internal voids, but as natural expressions of two people who have learned to love themselves so completely that they have authentic love to give. The signs appear quietly, almost imperceptibly, like flowers blooming in a garden that has been carefully tended through seasons of patient inner work. But these signs are so different from what we've been taught to expect that they often go unrecognized by those who haven't done the work of rebellion. They emerge from a place of such profound stillness and self-acceptance that they can seem almost ordinary, even boring, to those addicted to the drama of projection-based love. Yet for those who have eyes to see, these signs reveal the presence of something that transcends ordinary human experience, a love that's simultaneously deeply personal and universally archetypal, utterly human and mysteriously divine. The ultimate truth that Jung discovered, and that will fundamentally alter how you understand love, relationships, and human connection. Is this? True love is not a feeling, but a state of being. It's not something that happens to you, but something you become. And the 5 hidden signs that reveal its presence are not romantic gestures or passionate declarations, but subtle shifts in consciousness that most people mistake for the absence of love rather than its deepest expression. The first hidden sign is what Jung called the end of seeking. When true love appears, you stop looking for it. Not because you found it, but because you've become it. The restless search for your other half simply ceases. You no longer scroll through dating apps with that familiar mixture of hope and desperation. You stop analyzing every interaction for signs of romantic potential. The very concept of finding someone becomes meaningless because you've discovered that you were never incomplete to begin with. This sign appears so gradually that you might not notice it at first. You realize you haven't thought about dating in weeks, not because you're avoiding it, but because the urgency has simply vanished. You feel content in your own company in a way that's both new and strangely familiar, as if you've returned to a natural state you'd forgotten existed. When love appears in this state, it's not a rescue from loneliness, but a celebration of completeness. The second hidden sign is the dissolution of projection. You begin to see people, including romantic partners, as they actually are rather than as carriers of your unconscious material. This is simultaneously liberating and terrifying because it means you can no longer use relationships to avoid dealing with your own psyche. You stop falling in love with potential and start appreciating presence. You cease trying to change people and start accepting them. This sign manifests in practical ways that most people would find disturbing. You lose interest in your type, that mysterious pattern of attraction that has guided your romantic choices for years. You stop being drawn to people who trigger your rescue fantasies or challenge your self-worth. Instead, you find yourself attracted to qualities like emotional stability, genuine kindness, and psychological maturity. Qualities that your unconscious mind used to find boring, but that your conscious mind recognizes as the foundation of real intimacy. The third hidden sign is the capacity for solitude within togetherness. True love doesn't eliminate your need for space and autonomy. It enhances your ability to be alone even when you're with someone. You discover that the deepest intimacy occurs not through merger, but through the meeting of two sovereign beings who choose to share their inner worlds without losing their individual boundaries. This sign reveals itself in moments of profound stillness, sitting with someone in comfortable silence, feeling completely connected without needing to fill the space with words or activity. You realize that you can be fully present with another person without losing yourself, and that this capacity for conscious presence is what you've been seeking all along. The frantic need to constantly communicate, to know everything about each other, to merge into one identity, gives way to a spacious intimacy that honors both connection and autonomy. The fourth hidden sign is the transformation of jealousy into appreciation. When you're grounded in your own completeness, another person's beauty, success, or attention from others becomes a source of joy rather than threat. You stop trying to possess or control your partner and start celebrating their fullness. Jealousy, when it arises, becomes information about your own insecurities rather than evidence of your partner's betrayal. This sign often appears as a subtle shift in how you think about your partner's other relationships. You genuinely want them to have fulfilling friendships, meaningful work, and personal interests that don't include you. You realize that their happiness doesn't diminish yours, and that their growth as an individual actually enhances your connection. This isn't the result of emotional suppression, but of genuine psychological integration. The fifth hidden sign is the presence of the transcendent third. Jung discovered that true love creates something beyond both individuals, a shared field of consciousness that's greater than the sum of its parts. This isn't the merged identity of projection-based love, but something entirely different. A sacred space where both people can be fully themselves while participating in something larger than themselves. This sign manifests as moments of profound recognition, not of finding your other half, but of encountering another whole human being who mirrors your own depth and complexity. You experience what Jung called the union of opposites, not within a single person, but between two people who have integrated their own opposites. The relationship becomes a container for transformation rather than a means of avoiding it. But here's the paradox that Jung discovered. These signs only appear when you no longer need them. They emerge naturally from the soil of inner work, like flowers that bloom not because they're trying to be beautiful, but because they've received the right conditions for growth. The moment you start seeking these signs, you've already moved back into the realm of projection and need. This is why Jung believed that true love is simultaneously the most natural and the most rare human experience. It's natural because it's how we're designed to connect when we're psychologically whole. It's rare because the work of becoming whole is something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The ultimate realization is that love, real love, has been waiting for you all along. Not in another person, but in the depths of your own integrated psyche. Every failed relationship, every moment of loneliness, every instance of projection and disappointment has been preparing you for this recognition. The love you've been seeking externally is the love you become when you stop seeking and start being. Jung's greatest gift was showing us that the very mechanisms that create false love, projection, the anima and animus, the shadow, are also the raw materials for true love when they're consciously integrated. The same psychological processes that trap us in endless cycles of seeking and disappointment can liberate us into a love that's both deeply personal and universally healing. When you recognize these 5 hidden signs in your own experience, you're not just discovering true love, you're awakening to your own true nature. You're remembering what you've always known but temporarily forgotten, that you're already whole, already complete, already worthy of a love you've been seeking everywhere else. And from this recognition emerges the most beautiful paradox of all. The love that doesn't need anything from anyone becomes the love that can give everything to everyone. The person who stops seeking love becomes a source of love. The individual who integrates their own wholeness becomes capable of celebrating everyone else's wholeness. This is Jung's ultimate invitation, to stop seeking love and start being love. To recognize that the signs you've been looking for in others have been waiting patiently within you all along. To discover that true love is not something you find, but something you are.